Welcome to Watchtower History.
Jehovah's Witnesses were affected almost immediately. Since their beliefs did not allow them to render unconditional obedience to any state, they were maligned and assaulted ostensibly as internationalists, philo-Semitic or pro-Jewish, and also as Americans, because the founding corporation of the Jehovah's Witnesses was in the United States.
National Socialism presented itself as a Christian party. It talked about Christian values. I mean, it's highly hypocritical, but it talked about the family. It was very anti-communist, anti-atheist, anti-Marxist, anti-Zionist, and pro what it described as, the good Christian way of life. And churches were flying both swastikas and, Christian symbols on the spires very quickly. And there were theologians who, in Germany, who examined it all and, said, yes, this is definitely a new Christian age.
The Reichstag building, the seat of the German parliament, burns. The Nazis immediately blame the communists, and Hitler pressures President von Hindenburg to issue an emergency decree. The Enabling Act soon follows. Hitler, now with dictatorial powers, suspends human rights. Anyone could be arrested and imprisoned without trial. The Nazis now have a weapon to silence their enemies. The Nazis falsely branded Jehovah's Witnesses as communists, menaces to the state, conspirators with the Jews to take over the world. By 1933, the stage was set for battle.
From the start, the Nazis viewed them with suspicion as internationalists with American ties and as philo-Semitic, pro-Jewish, due to their theological beliefs and emphasis on Old Testament teachings.
The enemies of God's kingdom now denounce Jehovah's Witnesses as communist, Reds, and seditionists. Their charge, of course, is maliciously false. Jehovah's Witnesses have but one mission, and that is, in obedience to Jehovah's command to announce his kingdom and thus to tell the truth to the people. The effort of Satan and his religious agents is to set all political powers against Jehovah's Witnesses. By reason of false charges made by religious leaders, the ruling element of the nations have been prejudiced against Jehovah's Witnesses. Therefore, Jehovah declares his purpose to show all nations that he is the true and one friend of his witnesses, and that the nations have been caught in the religious snare of Satan. We have no earthly political aspirations. We are not communists, Nazis, or fascists, have no sympathy with such movements. We are not religionists, but we believe, as God has declared, that religion is the snare of the devil, in which men are unwittingly caught. We are not a sect, cult, or denomination. We are Christians, acting in obedience to the Lord's command.
God commands that this warning must now be given to the people. Jehovah's Witnesses and their companions, the other sheep, have nothing in common with communists, fascists, Nazis, or religionists. They're not in sympathy with such rule. In obedience to God's commandment, Jehovah's Witnesses hold themselves separate and unspotted from the world. They have no controversy with any man or organization. Be it known to all men, therefore, that we Jehovah's Witnesses and companions have nothing in common with, therefore entirely out of sympathy with, communism, Nazism, fascism, and religions, because all such are a reproach to the name of Jehovah, the supreme and almighty God, and are against his kingdom under Christ. We recognize and gladly announce that Satan's rule by selfish men must now end forever, and that Christ Jesus, the world's rightful King, shall forever rule in righteousness. That Christ Jesus is the Savior of men and the vindicator of Jehovah's name.
In 1933, shortly after Hitler's regime had assumed power, the German branch of the International Bible Students Association had already been declared part of a Bolshevist Jewish world conspiracy and had been prohibited. In 1943, after 10 years of semi-tolerance, the Gestapo struck hard at the Jehovah's Witnesses. Hermie and her family, along with other Jehovah's Witnesses, were taken into custody. After spending a year in detention awaiting trial under extremely brutal conditions, their sentences were handed down. Hermie's mother received 3 years in prison. Horst, Hermie's boyfriend, was sentenced to death. Hermie, considered a juvenile, received no sentence, but as she left the courthouse, she was unexpectedly taken into custody again by the Gestapo and eventually sent to Stutthof.
Dann kam schon die SS.
In Stutthof, I was at the mercy of the SS. Things became quite difficult for me. No curse word was too offensive, too cruel to hurl at me. They said, "It's all true. You are everything we've called you." "Yes," I would reply. "In your eyes, I'm all those things. And I'm also a rabble-rouser, a traitor, and a blasphemer." They would say, "No, we didn't say that." "That's true," I said. "But that's what was said to God's innocent son." And he responded, "A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecute me, they'll persecute you." That left them so speechless and confused that they left me alone for a while.
There's some interesting accusations made against the Jehovah's Witnesses during the Nazi period, and we're going to look at some of them. We lightly touched on some of this in our previous discussion. We're going to go into a little bit more depth on this and then go into the reasons why. So again, Professor Detlef Garbe, in his Between Resistance and Martyrdom, the Jehovah's Witnesses in the Third Reich, has some statements. In the summer of 1933, in a statement prepared for the Reich Chancellor, this Pastor Karl Garrick increased his hate campaign to persuade the Chancellor to take serious actions against the Bible students. At this time, he even accused the Bible students of having already made specific arrangements for a Bolshevik Armageddon. The assassination lists with the names of those doomed for destruction in the bloody Armageddon were already prepared at the outbreak of the National Socialist Revolution. However, owing to God's mercy, the incredible revolution that took place on January 30th protected the human race against this kind of secret Bolshevik murder. And of course, Hitler was elected on January 30th. And so Hitler is portrayed here as the savior against the so-called Bible student Bolshevik Armageddon. Why are they being accused of being communists? Okay, there's more. We talked about this quotation already in the timeline of our Stand Firm discussion, but on April 19th, it says that the Bible students were banned in the state of Hessen. At first, this state prohibited only their preaching activity. The Bible Students Association itself was not dissolved. The instructions that the state commissioner for the police authorities in Hessen sent to the district offices explained that the actions against the IBSA were based on the fact that their propaganda had repeatedly resulted in disruption of public law and order. The association was also under suspicion of maintaining contact with Marxist parties. So here's that accusation again. The communism, the socialism, and the Marxism. Why this particular accusation, and why against Watchtower? We'll answer that. Stay tuned. So on April 26th, Hans Dullinger, the legal counsel of Watchtower, traveled to Berlin. On behalf of the Northern and Southern German Bible Students Association, he submitted a petition to the Reich Chancellor. He requested that the Reich Chancellor to receive a delegation that could explain that the actions taken against the Bible students were based on, quote, a deliberate misrepresentation of the objectives of the Bible Students Association, since the denomination had always been, quote, completely non-political, unquote, and in their struggle against belief and decline of moral and traditional values was actually working, quote, in the same direction, unquote, as the right government. So again, why the accusation, and why is Watchtower claiming that they're actually working in the same direction as the right government? In the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Nazis Persecution, Deportation, and Murder book, it actually lists out the document that outlawed the Jehovah's Witnesses because of the leaflets they were distributing. It says that on May 15th, the International Association of Bible Students was outlawed in the Grand Duchy of Baden, and numerous trial proceedings were instituted before special courts. And there would be a total of 167 such proceedings in the Grand Duchy in 1933. In this statement, the last paragraph gives one of the accusations against the Bible students of Germany. It says, the dangerous intrigues of said association against today's state have been reinforced by the fact that for some time, former communists and Marxists have joined their ranks, hoping to find shelter and allowing them to fight the government. The Association of Students of the Bible and its allied organizations, therefore, favor communism and welcome into the organization the most varied elements hostile to the state, notably communists belonging to the very active organized groups. In order to fight these communist intrigues and for the maintenance of the public order and safety, this movement is dissolved. And it was signed by the Secretary of the Ministerial Chancellery. And Detlef Garbe has exactly the same thing. And it gives a little more. And it says, the communist members of this movement are ambitiously involved in organizing communist actions. To resist communist activities and maintain public law and order, it is therefore necessary to dissolve this association for the protection of people and state. In his book, Detlef Garbe also says, on July 9th, 1933, the Sunday paper published its approval of the fact that the, quote, Marxist Bible students, unquote, in Prussia had been banned. So again, there is the same exact accusation of the communist, Marxist, socialist accusations against Watchtower. Why? We'll answer that. Stay tuned. So Johannes Robel has an article called The Video Documentary, Jehovah's Witnesses Stand Firm Against Nazi Assault. Propaganda or historical document, falsification of history or historical accuracy. This is in Han Hese's persecution and resistance of Jehovah's Witnesses during the Nazi regime. Remember, Robel is a Jehovah's Witness apologist. And what Robel says is interesting. Robel says, whereas critics today impute anti-Semitism to the Jehovah's Witnesses in 1933, anti-Semites, Nazis, and church representatives, especially experts about sex, have claimed just the opposite. In 1935, this paper was even of the opinion that Jehovah's Witnesses fought existing racial laws of the Third Reich with special animosity. And so this is Robel's attempt to soften some of the statements that Rutherford makes. And we're going to get into some of that anti-Semitism here very, very soon. In Garbe's Between Resistance and Martyrdom, he talks about Penton's view. Penton's, or what he suggests is Penton's theory about what Rutherford wrote to Hitler in 1933. Or Garbe says, according to Penton's new theory, in 1931 to 32, the Watchtower Society's President Rutherford made an adjustment in the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses with regard to determining its relationship to Judaism, because in Germany, everything pointed to the fact that Hitler would come to power. So when I read Penton's book, I didn't quite get this idea, and we're going to deal with this head on And I think we'll have a very clear, well-documented answer for Professor Garbe, but stay tuned, we're getting there. But Garbe continues. In this way, Rutherford supposedly wanted to adapt to the anti-Semitic aggression of National Socialism. Contemporary literature does not support such assumptions. In fact, reports in Jehovah's Witnesses magazine Golden Age during that time period show that in publications of Jehovah's Witnesses, the Hitler movement was clearly criticized as being ungodly, and its anti-Semitism was strongly condemned. Penton does indeed have a right to hold reservations against the religious teachings and practicing of Jehovah's Witnesses, but from a historiographic viewpoint, Penton's writings perhaps show a lack of scientific objectivity. And so again, what Garbe's pointing to and what Penton is saying are two different things. What Garbe's claiming of Penton, I didn't see when I read Penton's book, and I've read it a couple of times. But we're going to deal with some of these specific points, and we're going to come back to this accusation in a little while. Stay tuned. It's very interesting. So in the June 22nd, 2000 Awake magazine, there's a statement, "You miserable Jew," snapped the school teacher as she slapped her 7-year-old student. She then invited the class to file by him and to spit in his face. Both the teacher and the student, her nephew, knew perfectly well that the boy and his parents were not of Jewish descent, nor were they Jewish by faith. Rather, they were Jehovah's Witnesses. Taking advantage of widespread prejudice against Jews, the teacher was fostering hatred of her student. So we have accusations of them being communists. We also have accusations of the Jehovah's Witnesses as being Jews. Why these accusations? So in Simone Leipster's book, Facing the Lion, and we talked about her story in the Stand Firm and the Back Down discussion. She said, "When I got to the corner of the street, another smaller group of children confronted me. Some of the boys jumped at me, circling around me like bees, swarming around Candy and calling me, 'Dirty Jew, dirty Jew.' Why do they call me a Jew and why dirty? I wasn't either one." Passerby finally chased the children away. Mother's reading in one of the Gospels was about persecution, hatred, and insults. I felt confident in my beliefs that came from the Bible, but I wanted to know, why dirty Jew? Our butcher was Jewish, and he was very clean. Mother liked him because he was honest and kind. I felt terrible about the accusation without understanding why. Sitting on my father's lap and listening to my mother read the Bible to me, I learned the meaning of this expression. At the table one day they explained, as you learn more about history, you'll find out that so-called Christians wouldn't let Jews have jobs as craftsmen or similar work. They were kept in special sections of town being accused of killing God. I knew that. The priest told us about it. But God never came to earth to be killed by man. So a little bit further down, she said, little by little, the children tired of chasing me on the street. I had told them that Jesus, the Son of God, was a Jew. And being called a Jew is an honorable statement. I was proud of it. All the apostles and Bible writers had been Jews, and I wanted to follow them. So again, here's the accusation, Jew. Why Jew? So Simone's grandparents were not Jehovah's Witnesses. And there was some family contention about that. There was a get-together at their home, and Grandma makes a statement. Bibelforscher are communist agents. You must earn lots of money running around like you do, Valentine yelled. Yes, for that you have good feet, added Aunt Eugenie. You fool. You only make those American leaders rich, Aunt Valentine said sarcastically. You are paid by the Jewish world power and are undermining the church, said Aunt Eugenie. With a threatening voice, Grandma said emphatically, if you want to stay a member of the family, you keep away from that sect. All right, so again, now they're being accused not only of being communist and Jews, but as somebody paid by the Jewish world power to undermine the church.
Now, here's the irony of this. Simone wrote this, and she doesn't understand what she wrote. as we'll get into later,
Yeah.
where she doesn't understand why all these accusations and threats and all that is happening, especially the statement you just read.
Yeah, I like that you made that point, because she was a Jehovah's Witness and they're hearing these things. She's reporting them, years later when she writes the book, but she doesn't know where these ideas are coming from. And so we're going to get into that in just a little bit here. Stay tuned. So in 1936, Dr. Hans Jonas von Freienwald wrote a book, The Jehovah's Witnesses, The Political Goals of the Jehovah's Witnesses. He's also making accusations that the Jehovah's Witnesses are involved with the Jews in a nefarious way. And he says, for the goal of Jewish politics is not the establishment of a Jewish national state limited to Palestine, but rather a Jewish universal empire encompassing all countries as their prophets, especially Isaiah predicted to them. Judaism, like, after all, the non-Jewish world, deny tactical reasons against his world domination addiction. As yet, his whole politic of the political religious dogma ruled that the Jews are determined as the chosen people of God to the earth to speak. And so if you think about Watchtower theology, they thought that under the Russell theology, the Rutherford theology was completely different. But under the Russell theology, the idea was that there'd be a kingdom here on the earth, and that it would be primarily a Jewish kingdom, that everybody would become Jews. The Zechariah 8 scripture, 10 men would take the hold of the skirt of a Jew, saying, "Oh, let us come with you, for we know the Lord is with you. We want you to teach us of his ways." And so the Nazis took this and spun it in a different way, because they were racist against the Jews and said, oh, if somebody who likes the Jews is looking for a Third Reich and we have a Third Reich, well, they want a Jewish Third Reich. We're trying to get rid of the Jews. And so the Jehovah's Witnesses got sucked into their racist ideology on the German Nazi side here.
Well, and to add to that, that's why Hitler basically went after them to start with. The Heil Hitler, as we showed, was secondary.
Yeah. He went after the Jews and the Bible students a few days after he came to power. This is before Heil Hitler or any of the other things that were happening was even made law and that they had to do it. He specifically went after those two groups and no one else right out of the gate, because they're classifying the Jehovah's Witnesses, who they thought loved the Jews, and so they were trying to go after everything Jewish. That racism that they were involved in, that it became the final plan, right, to get rid of all the Jews. And they had not realized that Watchtower had changed their theology and no longer at all like the Jews. So if you haven't seen our discussion on the replacement theology, where we get into some of that, take a look at that, because I think it makes it very, very clear what was going on there.
And we're saying all this because Jehovah's Witnesses believe the reason it happened was for no other reason than refusing the Heil Hitler. Not true.
So in Rutherford's booklet, His Vengeance, he states that the JWs were accused of being Bolsheviks and anarchists. So again, why this accusation? These are very strange accusations, because they were the furthest from communists that you could even think of. Very interesting question.
Well, Rutherford just answered it, and because Satan is responsible for that false charge.
Okay.
And to blind the people to the truth.
But then he would blame the Catholics, he would blame the Protestants, he would blame the Jews. He was blaming the Jews just like Hitler is blaming the Jews. They were doing similar things. Very, very sad story of what happened there, but Rutherford and Hitler are doing the same things. Very, very despicable. In Rutherford's booklet, Armageddon, the greatest battle of all time, who will survive? He suggests that the Roman Catholic hierarchy, with ambition to control the whole world, raises the hue and cry that everyone that's not for the hierarchy is a communist. So I think here it sounds like Rutherford's trying to divert the accusation away. I think Rutherford knows what the accusation is all about.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like he's trying to divert it to something different than what it was. We'll get into what that was and why in just a little bit.
Now, curiously, what year was Armageddon written? That one.
This is 1937. This booklet was written in 1937. All right.
And yeah, around that time, he would have wanted to divert attention away from himself and point it to the Catholics.
Yeah. So I find that was an interesting statement here that I think we really need to think about as we learn more about what these accusations were and why. It says, for instance, the fascists of Italy, whose dictator now rules with an iron hand, are supported by the hierarchy. The Nazis that rule in Germany, by the cruel fist of one Hitler, are in full accord with the hierarchy. So Rutherford, again, blaming everyone else rather than what the actual real issue that's going on here.
What he's trying to do also is tie in how the kings of the earth back before World War I, the kings of the earth were in bed with the Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Empire. And he's trying to show in some aspect that that's still the same thing and make Hitler trying to be in bed and continue that same philosophy.
And that's why they're coming after us. And because we're being persecuted, it proves we're the chosen ones.
Yeah.
That's where he's going with it. All right. So in Rutherford's booklet, Government and Peace, this is written in 1939.
So we're getting closer and closer.
Yeah. All right. So in this booklet, Rutherford raises the accusations of communists, Reds, seditionists, and answers that we have no earthly political aspirations. We are not communists, Nazis, and fascists. We have no sympathies with such movements. And so he's bringing in this neutrality stance. This is the year that it came out, 1939. And so they've been accused for years of being communists and fascists and anarchists and trying to dominate the world and being Jews. And now, 1939, the war starts, and they come out with this neutrality stance. Remember, the neutrality article in the Watchtower is just about 2 months after the war started. And so remember, it would take a couple months by the time he would write an article, edit it, get it typeset, get it in the magazine, and get it sent out. Yep. So I think he wrote it when he saw the war start, and he realized he had been in trouble with the First World War for not making the situation very, very clear from the start what he wanted, seditious charges. And now I think he's trying to avoid finding themselves into more trouble here in the Second World War.
And how did that work out?
And then he's already instigating problems with Hitler in Germany. He's trying to avoid the same in the United States and other places. And it didn't work out real well for them. See how the Jehovah's Witnesses backed down against Nazi assault discussion for more on that. The 1974 Yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses has a statement here that the Gestapo searched the Bethel home. The Nazis were hoping to find some kind of material connecting us with communism when they occupied the Society's office and factory on April 24th. A little bit further down, after searching the building, the police called up the government officials one evening, telling them that they had found nothing incriminating. The command was, "You must find something." But their attempt to do so failed, and the property had to be returned to the brothers on April 29th. And then Watchtower instigated the issue again, and then they lost the property. But again, the Nazis were trying to connect Watchtower with some kind of communist plot. We'll get into that a little bit more later. So the book, The Jehovah's Witnesses and the Nazis, Persecution, Deportation, and Murder, says that on May 29th, 1933, in conformity with the decision of the Bronswick Tribunal in Brunswick, the Watchtower Society's publishing arm was disbanded. And this is the reason why. In order to defend against harmful acts of communist violence against the state, it appears equally opportune to ban such organizations which may, without their leaders being aware, harbor friends of the communists. And so they can't find anything really hard to pin on them. And so they're saying, well, maybe they are involved with the communists, but they aren't aware of it. Detlef Garbe, who wrote a favorable book on the Jehovah's Witnesses in the Third Reich called Between Resistance and Martyrdom, says the authorities did not recognize that the anticipated change of conditions would be realized by Jehovah's saving power, according to Bible student teachings. Accordingly, as long as God did not decide to take action, the rulers of the world actually had nothing to fear from the Bible students. All the authorities heard was establishment of a kingdom that would bring peace on earth without any class and race distinctions, and destruction of the powers of the world. This sounded familiar in the Russian Revolution and its resulting upheavals. Strange as it may seem, the opponents accused the Bible students quite simply of being pioneers of Bolshevism. And so what Detlef Garbe is suggesting is that this is nothing more than it sounded like communism to them, the theology, and because they had no race distinctions, I think Garbe is missing the point. And we're going to show the evidence for that and why, what the real reason was, and the documentation behind that. But again, the question is, why? And if there is another reason, what does that say about Garbe's accusations against Penton's treatise on Jehovah's Witnesses in the Third Reich? Stay tuned. We're getting there.
And as you stated, Garbe's publisher was pro-Jehovah Witness.
Yeah, he's being financed.
Yeah, financed by it. So
his book is financed by the Jehovah's Witnesses. But does Garbe really know? I can't say yes or no. I really don't know. But we're getting there. We'll explain what we're meaning by that very, very, very soon. Garbe continues. According to Fetz, the Bible student participation in World Revolution was restricted not only to intellectual involvement. Fetz paints a horrifying picture describing the IBSA as fanatical combat patrols and stormtroopers that will take action against state, church, and civil order. And here's the quote. Bible student troops will tear down altars, destroy churches, storm schools and universities, stone religious and university teachers, and, as in Russia, nail clergymen to church doors. All the while, they will imagine that with these acts of destruction, they are rendering an especially pleasing and loyal service to God. And so the accusation is, well, they're going to be just as violent as the communists were when they overtook Russia. They're trying to tie them into the plot, except those Jehovah's Witnesses were exactly the opposite. They were more peaceful and wouldn't even hold a gun. And so the accusations, of course, didn't hold any water at all. This quote here continues. It says, these teachings have a pre-Christian Jewish origin and are based on pagan ideas. And so they're even suggesting Watchtower's theology and Jewish theology were based on pagan ideas rather than Christian ideals. Then it says, the controversy now centers on an alleged Jewish character of the Brooklyn sect. As a result, the most serious anti-Semitic hatred hails down on the IBSA, which, according to Fetz, is in reality a Jewish organization. But again, at the time these accusations are being made, Watchtower's theology had completely changed. They were no longer lovers of the Jewish people. They were producing a lot of anti-Semitic hatred in their literature. And we'll get into some of that. We talked a little bit about that before, but we're going to get into some more of it here.
I find that last sentence really interesting. The controversy now centers on an alleged Jewish character of the Brooklyn sect, obviously, who they're talking about. As a result, the most serious anti-Semitic hatred hails down on the International Bible Students. That's very interesting that Garbe wrote that.
Yeah, they're being treated like Jews in an anti-Semitic hatred, those Jehovah's Witnesses, who also were anti-Semitic.
Mm-hmm.
How ironic is that?
It's
And
almost
how sad.
to an
How
extent.
sad, right?
Yeah, to an extent, Garb's admitting that the witnesses were anti-Semitic while he's saying that.
In a roundabout way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's an accusation here that the Jews had commissioned the Bible students to hypnotize the masses in order to cause complete confusion. And this increasing confusion, in turn, would set the mental stage for Jewish world domination.
You know, he might be right about that one. I've seen
there is confusion.
Yeah, I've seen what happens to Jehovah's Witnesses, so there might be some truth to that one.
And so the accusation continues. What democracy and Marxism accomplish in the political arena, the Bible students do in the field of church and religion. Yet, if they're not real successful in what they're doing, if it was 80-90% of the world were Jehovah's Witness, then maybe you could see that was one of the way that they were trying to get world domination, but they would be very, very poor at it to even try and use the Jehovah's Witnesses for such an idea. And then yet the Jehovah's Witnesses had hatred for them, their anti-Semitic hatred. So it boggles the mind why the Nazis are making these accusations, except we know why. And we're getting to that soon. The February 21st, 1940 consolation says, "You have been deceived and made a slave of the Jews." So again, same accusation. We see this accusation again and again and again. Back to the Die Zeugen Jehovah's book, 1936, Germany. It says the Bible students are being blamed here for loving the Jews because of glorification of all that is Jewish. That's why Hitler went after them to start with. Hitler thought they loved the Jews. They had been pro-Zionist. They had only changed their views just a few months before Hitler came to power. They had become anti-Semitic and were bringing in that replacement theology. They didn't have enough time to realize the Jehovah's Witnesses no longer believe those things. So now they're getting attacked for things they didn't believe.
You couldn't have planned that timing window.
Yeah. It's
for that
ironic.
To into place the way it did.
It's so ironic that these anti-Semites are attacking anti-Semites for being these haters of the Jews, or attacking those who hate the Jews, accusing them of loving the Jews. It's just...
And meanwhile,
unfortunately, the sad thing is that there were 6 million Jews that were killed by the Nazis. There were thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses that were imprisoned, and hundreds that died. So, it's sad. We make fun of the timing. We're making fun of the situation. We're making fun of, but it's a very, very serious matter, and so we're trying to even out the conversation by having periods of lightness and then also to be serious at the same time. In Hez's book, Johannes Robel, the Jehovah's Witness, has a statement in here, and he says he has exactly the same quote from that we just saw about the witnesses were being accused of hypnotizing the masses at the command of the Jews. And so many of these statements are found in most of these books that are written on the subject by the scholars. Now, Detlef Garbe, in his book, Between Resistance and Martyrdom, states that even one of the anti-Semitic books of the Nazis even accused Russell of being a Jew. Garbe says, even a few years prior to Fetz, Hans Leinhardt selected the Bible students as an object of his insolent anti-Semitic attacks. He considered the IBSA activities to be a gigantic crime against the German nation. Leinhardt announced that the IBSA intended to destroy the churches, overthrow the governments, and strive for world revolution to confer world domination to a future Jewish Messiah. For this reason alone, the Bible students propagated the destruction of the nations in the War of Armageddon. The whole matter supposedly was a criminal act on the part of the Jews wrapped up in Bible texts, with the objective of securing world domination and subjugating the German nation. Leinhardt states that the Bible students with German heritage had been misled without recognizing the background of the teachings of the denomination's founder, whom Leinhardt describes in his 1921 publication as Russell the Jew. In Leinhardt's opinion, these German Bible students were not completely lost, especially since they had within their ranks very decent, morally religious, upright people. He continued his explanations with a complaint that clearly reflected the inconsistency in his nationalist socialist judgment about the Bible students. Quote, how great it would be if such high morals could be found in the entire German nation, unquote. So there, again, not only these accusations that they're communist, socialist, Marxist, but also that they're Jewish or even literally Jews. Again, the question, why? Why these strange, bizarre accusations? Stay tuned, we're getting there. With regard to calling the first president of the Bible students, quote, Russell the Jew, unquote, see the revealing statements made by known anti-Semite Hans Jonas von Freinwald in 1941. Freinwald said, quote, Charles Taze Russell, who is most likely is of Jewish descent, even though this has not been confirmed, was the founder and first president of the Bible student movement until 1916. His teachings definitively indicate that he was of the same mind as the Jews, unquote. Not surprisingly, similar statements were made regarding Rutherford. In April 1937, the Württemberg Evangelisk Preservant published an article in its journal on the subject. This article includes the following statement. Assertions had been made that Rutherford is of Jewish descent. However, Jonas von Freinwald, who also published under the pseudonym Dr. Hans von Jonas during the NS period, did not want to take matters to that extreme. Yet even he used this most effective argument of that particular time period. Quote, even though their current president, J.F. Rutherford, is not a Jew, he uses his Jewish vice president, C.A. Weiss, to publish various articles in his name, unquote. These are, again, more of these accusations trying to tie in the Bible students, the Jehovah's Witnesses of the time period, trying to tie Russell, trying to tie Rutherford into this, into the Jews, into the Jewish ideology, into the Jewish religion, to make them a part of this Jewish global conspiracy that they were pushing against. This is the catalyst for what they did in World War II to the Jews and Bible students and others. This is them trying to find something that they can pin on the Bible students, even though untrue, completely untrue, trying to pin on them so they could justify the things that they were doing. But we'll get more into that here in the future. Stay tuned. Garbe continues. The controversy now centers on an alleged Jewish character of the Brooklyn sect. As a result, the most serious anti-Semitic hatred hails down on the IBSA, which according to Fetz is in reality a Jewish organization. Actually, the Bible students did not repudiate the Jewish origin of the Christian faith. This gave anti-Semitic groups ammunition for their hate campaigns. For instance, they resented the Bible students' use of the name Jehovah. They also took offense at the fact that the Bible students placed special importance on the Old Testament, emphasizing that the Israelites were God's chosen people, acknowledging the patriarchy of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and showing respect for the Mosaic law. But most of all, the anti-Semites resented the Bible students' adherence to Bible prophecies involving Zion. The publications of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society explained that the Zionist movement gave clear evidence that the time of the end had arrived, the time when Jehovah God would gather his covenant people in Palestine and Zion would once again become the home to Israel. For the anti-Semites, such explanations amounted to collaboration with their most hated enemy, Zionism. The majority of the Christian churches who rejected their Jewish origin, or were at least not aware of it, had long forgotten their biblical heritage and did not acknowledge Jesus' words according to which salvation comes from the Jews. That the Bible students accepted their biblical heritage provoked the relentless hatred and opposition of the anti-Semitic groups. The Bible student teachings in the 1920s were completely free from any anti-Judaism of the Christian churches. In 1925, the Watchtower Society's president, Rutherford, as the highest earthly spokesman of the present people of God, stated that it was important to acknowledge the nation of Israel for the very fact that, quote, for a long time, it was the visible part of God's organization on earth, unquote. So again, here, Garvey doesn't go far enough. He rightfully talks about the Watchtower beliefs in the 1920s and Rutherford's book, the pro-Zionist stance in the 1920s. And of course that, originated with the Russell period. But he doesn't go to the anti-Semitic statements here in the 1930s, when Watchtower became quite opposed to the natural Israelites. Anti-Semitism is not something new. This goes back centuries to the early church, the Dark Ages, medieval times, and grew exceptionally popular in the 18th and 19th centuries.
And it is part of a web of lies that grew over centuries and starts, many believe, with the books of the New Testament.
One is the Gospel of John, where he puts in the mouth of Jesus the following sentence. Jesus speaking to the Jews, says, "Those who claim they are Jews, I tell them you are not. Your father is the devil, and you fulfill his wishes on earth." Very simple here. Your father is the devil, and you fulfill his wishes on earth. Not thinking that if he says the father of the Jews is the devil, the father of Christ also would be the devil.
Then, in medieval times, the demonization of the Jews has reached a fever pitch. But it wasn't until 1797 that what was essentially a religious prejudice turned into a political one. It happened through the writings of a French cleric, Abbé Barruel, during a period of paranoia and social chaos following the French Revolution. Barruel blames the Jews for all of France's ills.
It is the desire of that terrible and formidable sect to overthrow all thrones, all altars, annihilate all property, efface all law, and end by dissolving all society.
Barruel's theme of a secret Jewish plot to conquer the world quickly becomes a staple in late 18th century European literature. Conspiracy theories are popular, and the Jews are an easy target.
Watchtower under the Rutherford presidency went from a pro-Zionist stance to a very anti-Semitic one. The question is, why?